Episode number 4. No, 5. Episode number 5. Welcome.
It's going so fast, we're losing track.
I know, it's so much fun. Again, my name is Bill Ulivieri, owner of Senecal Capital Management, long-time Glenview resident since 1986, and the owner of Senecal Capital Management. We're a state-registered investment advisory firm. We manage IRAs, 401ks, and small business pension plans. And we also, in December 2018, received our Illinois insurance producer license. So we realized that long-term care and annuities, something I've hated my entire life, really do play an important part of a holistic financial plan, because what I see coming down the road in terms of interest rates. With me, I'll let everybody introduce themselves. Matt Berrafato and Charmaine Conaghan.
Great. Matt Berrafato, the Elephant Hunter. I'm an author and speaker and a life coach, and I help people deal with the 7 arenas that everyone deals with in their life of anything that goes on. And what I love about this show that we're doing, or this conversation we're having, is that there are different topics that affect those of us in the final third of our life. And people are going, what does that mean? Well, final third of our life means that take the oldest living relative you have in your family. Mine happens to be my dad. He's 90. Divide it by 3. Okay, so when I'm 60 years old, I'm in the final third of my life if I live as long as my dad does today. If you're there, great. Welcome to the club. If you're almost there and it's in reach, welcome to the club, because we're going to give...
Because you're dealing with with people in the final third.
That's right, all the time. So it's either your final third or they were in the final third. What's the parameters behind it? And I think that this is something that is, if you don't think about it, then you're going to have stuff happen to you, and that's what we're going to talk about. But introduce yourself.
Don't be an ostrich. I'm Charmaine Conaghan. I own Always Best Care Senior Services. We are a caregiving agency here in Glenview. I have a great roster of caregivers, a full office staff, and we help people who are in the final third.
Right. And this episode strives to be about 20 minutes in length, as all the episodes are, because it represents a third of an hour. So we thought we'd be kind of cute with that. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about being reactive versus proactive. I'm going to give my perspective as a reactive or proactive things that I see as an investment advisor. Charmaine's going to talk about the home care business and what she sees in her contact with people, and Matt's going to talk about it with his bins. So Matt, why don't you go first as to just take a few minutes to discuss reactive versus proactive in these 7 arenas of life.
Okay, so what I think is something I love to use the terminology in the coaching I do is, wouldn't it be cool if you had a compass, that this compass is your personal compass and it's never wrong when you're faced with a decision. Decision point, I can look at the compass, I know, do I go this way, do I go that way? Well, if you're being reactive, how can you don't know. There's no way you would be able to know.
You're making uninformed decisions.
Exactly, and that's in every arena. So the arenas are your spiritual arena, your mental arena, your financial arena, your career arena, your family arena, your social arena, and your financial arena. So 7, everybody lives in those arenas. And my point is, every time when you're not proactive, you're going to end up making decisions with a blindfold on, thinking and hoping that it's the right one. And what happens every time in planning is, if you actually just spent some time and recorded what is most important to you on paper, that's really what I do when I coach to people. And then you can say, okay, now I'm in the final third. What's most important to me? If I don't do something about that and be intentional about it, then maybe it'll happen. And what if it's something so important about my career or my parents or my wife or my family itself or my finances? Again, it's always, do you want a blindfold, or do you want to actually know that when you make a decision, it's the right decision? And I think that's what I think when you say proactive versus reactive. Reactive is never, I was a hockey goalie. I always was reactive because I had to react on how to make a save when that puck came at me. But if you do your life that way, it doesn't have to be that hard, because it's not easy to react all the time. So that's my perspective. How about you, Charmaine?
Oh my goodness, we see proactive versus reactive every day here at Always Best Care. I get 2 types of phone calls. I get phone calls, meaning intake phone calls from people looking for services. I get the people who see changes coming and they just want to prepare and they want to get a caregiver in with mom or dad or themselves, maybe a couple of days a week, 4-6 hours a day, just to make sure that everything keeps going okay. So that's one type of phone call. And then another type of phone call I get is from a panicked family member. Something happened, mom broke her hip, she's in the hospital, now what? And I'm here to tell you the hospitals are very busy places, and the discharge planners are amazing people, but they have
Overwhelmed.
stacks of people this high that they have to make sure are directed, and they're not always able to tell you everything you need to know about what's next and how Medicare works. How does Medicare work? Well, if you don't know how Medicare works and your mother is in the hospital with a broken bone, you're going to find out really fast.
We're gonna do episodes upon episodes just on Medicare. I think that's really an important topic.
I know.
Absolutely.
In terms of my perspective as an investment advisor, the proactive versus reactive, I would say I probably see it broken down into a few things. Either the husband had passed away and left multiple accounts at multiple locations for their spouse, for their wife, and the statements keep coming in the mail, and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know whether they should shred it or open up the documents before looking at it.
Right.
Because traditionally the husband was in charge of the investments. So I see one is that there's too many accounts in too many different locations. What does that mean? It means that it's hard to kind of keep your arms around how much money you really have and how it's reacting, to the ebbs and flows of the market. Mm-hmm. 2, you don't really have a holistic picture of what your portfolio looks like. You need a 35,000 foot view, a snapshot of what everything looks like in a risk scenario. If the market's up 30% or down 30%, like we saw both after the internet bubble burst or after the housing market collapsed. There's always, if you don't know where your risk is, then you will be reactive with your portfolio rather than proactive. And then thirdly, I think expenses. We've seen a zero interest rate world by the federal government, by the Federal Reserve for the last 10 years. And when your mutual funds are charging you 1.25%, 1.5% annually, when a equivalent fund can be purchased that costs 5, rather than 5 versus 150, 5 ticks versus 100 ticks. That 1% on $100,000 or 1% on a $600,000 portfolio, it's a lot of money. That's money you can give to grandkids. That's money that's just going out the window. So I want people to know that since the early 2000s, there are investments now, because of the regulatory and legal structure has reduced the cost of investing to almost nothing, and that needs to be looked at. But if you're afraid to look at it, if you're afraid to take a peek and open up the envelope, then you're just wasting money. So I think a proactive retired person would aggregate the accounts at one location. They would just find an investment advisor, hopefully a fiduciary, an accredited fiduciary. Let them just take a peek at the portfolio to see what it costs and where the risks are. Right. And that would those are just a couple of good steps going forward.
Charmaine, you had a story. Tell a story that the proactive versus reactive as far as power of attorney, and it was very powerful.
Power of attorney, yes. Well, we touched on this last episode. So mom was showing signs of memory loss. This family called, and mom had shown signs of memory loss for a couple of years, and her adult children were apparently trying to get her to go along with signing a power of attorney, and she was very resistant. She knew it was happening to her. She didn't want to admit what was happening to her, and she was defensive, and she didn't want to let go, right? Well, an incident happened in her condo this past week where she was taken from her condo and brought to the hospital, and the children quickly realized that they could not have her go back home. They certainly couldn't have her go back home with alone with no care, but also she had posed a risk to the safety of the other occupants of that building. So she really, I think, is not allowed to go back to that condo. So I get this reactive phone call from the adult child saying, okay, here's the situation, can you help me? She's being released today. Now, it's 3:00 in the afternoon, and I'm, okay, let's see, what can I do? So, I said, well, we can try to get a caregiver wherever she releases to, wherever you have her go, either to your brother's house or to her friend's house. We can have a caregiver there. I just need to know what time and what her needs are, and we'll figure it out. We'll get someone there. We can always manage that. And then perhaps, either that's the situation, we arrange care, or we have her go to a memory care place, assisted living, where it sounds like she really needs to be. And you can go to assisted living on a respite basis, which is a temporary basis. We are so blessed in this area to have wonderful doctors and resources, and
the North Shore is a great community.
Yes, and great assisted living, great memory care. There are multiple communities that I would recommend. So, I said, well, I can do that and I can get you rates. In the meantime, though, she has no power of attorney.
Well, so you hung up the phone, forgetting to even ask them that.
I did. In that moment, I was like, okay, I got to find, because I care. I hear someone in distress and I want to act on it. And so then I start debriefing one of my fantastic, I've got a fantastic staff here. And she said, do they have any right to put her anywhere? And I said, oh God, I should have thought of that first. Yeah.
Right. So you had a solution.
She doesn't.
So you had a solution
sure
for
did.
her, even though they can't.
I had 4 solutions.
Even
for her.
though,
couldn't take advantage.
I had
though
3 communities that could take her and would take her,
Right.
and we could send her a caregiver.
and even though they were being reactive when they called you because it just happened, you couldn't actually help them because they were not proactive to having this power of attorney
She
done.
wouldn't allow it. Apparently, I don't know. I haven't talked to them.
It didn't get done.
Yeah.
It didn't get done.
One of the things that I
Right? It didn't get done. So
Correct.
now you're.
One of the things that I had a success with my dad was he felt incredibly guilty for having to sell his house in Chicago and move to a smaller facility in Des Plaines. He felt like the provider in him had let everybody down because my mom, they had a 3-story house, asbestos shingled, built in the 1920s in Chicago. The staircases were as steep as you'd see in any farmhouse, and it was hard for them to maneuver. They really lived on the first floor. My mom fell asleep in a small portable hospital bed that was on the first floor, and my dad would always fall asleep in the lazy boy in front of the TV set. So for my mom and dad, my dad didn't want to make a decision because he felt guilty. He felt bad. But when I finally told him that he wasn't the bad guy, he wasn't the bad guy in any of this. He had always taken care of the family. He always did what needed to be done. Right. He would work 2 jobs. He'd work 3 jobs. He drove a junky car for most of his life, all to provide for the family. So the sense of guilt that maybe your parents are going through doesn't really exist because past performance shows that they're hardworking and caring and they sacrifice it to do what's best. Maybe you just need to frame the conversation to alleviate some of that fear and some of that bad feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, but so
It's all about positioning.
Right. The lesson we're trying. And we're always trying to have this conversation be of value to you when you're watching this. And the value is what are some things? One of the things we need to do is, like you were saying, Charmaine, before, know the lay of the land. So if you are this person who is either approaching the final third or you're in the final third, do you know your picture of your financial situation, all of the different insurances you have or don't have, or any policies you do or don't have? And do you have children that you have not even assigned for powers of attorney? But understanding that and having the conversation. We're about to have that conversation with our 3 children, age 36, 34, and 30, okay? Because we want them not to be behind the 8 ball if something were to happen to both of us, okay? And because of the experience we had with my father-in-law and now my dad. So what we're trying to share, what are the things you need to do? One of the things you need to do, first of all, I'm going to ask the question to you. Do you have a will? If you're a young family that's married and in the state of Illinois, you want to have a will. I'm not an attorney, my dad is, but you want to have a will because you don't want the state telling who's going to raise your children. Okay? And that's what will happen if you don't have a will.
You don't want to have to go to probate.
Exactly. You don't want to go to probate. And so in the will also is where you can start to take care of the power of attorney healthcare, power of attorney property. And those are the things that are just natural. So my dad, we had to redo his will while he was still of sound mind, which we got that done. Okay? Couldn't do it right now because you know what? I mean, if we had to make the change now, what do you do? Well, we didn't make the change because my sister moved out of town, and I had to, so we had to juggle around who's number 1, number 2, and number 3, and we got it done. But luckily,
isn't it interesting? Remember growing up watching like family classics? It was like I, John Doe, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath. If you don't have sound mind or body, like
You
You
can't.
need to get that done by an attorney.
Oh my God.
This is not something you can do on the back of a napkin.
No, it just isn't today. And so, please, if you haven't done these things, this is what we're trying to do today. This, the pain. When you get to the point where you have to call Charmaine, it would be really nice if you've taken care of the financial piece of that.
Right.
Because on top of even if you have taken care of the financial piece, the twilight zone that you will be in is hard enough emotionally.
Right.
And so this is just worse if you have the double whammy of, I can't afford to put them into a nice place because they didn't have the wherewithal to do that.
And that's okay if they don't have the wherewithal to go to the nicest place in town. At least if you know what they do have, there are answers out there.
Right.
There is something for everyone, I believe.
Right.
Another thing that I would bring up, we could spend hours talking about Medicare.
Sure. We've got 5 more minutes in this segment, so go ahead.
I just want to say that you need to understand if your loved one or you are of age to have Medicare, you need to understand how it works.
Right.
Because if your parent has a fall and they end up in the hospital, or if they're just not doing well and they need to go to the emergency room, you need to understand what you should do. You should always bring a medication list to the emergency room with you, and make sure you know who the doctors are, who should be contacted.
Phone numbers, addresses, emails.
There's a hospitalist at the hospital who will be making all of these decisions for your loved one, and they should be in consult with their doctors. But the biggest thing that you should know is how Medicare works when you go to the hospital. If your observation or your inpatient is huge, you need to know what your status is. Always ask, what's my status? What's my mom's status? And you also need to know if this person, if the patient is inpatient, if they are sent home after 3 midnights having been there, then they are entitled to go to a rehab center to receive rehab for getting stronger, and it will be paid for by Medicare. So, and if they don't, we had a situation this week where we had a gentleman go to the hospital. He fell, his wife couldn't get him up. He's got her by 150 pounds, I think. He ends up in the emergency room. They put him in a room. He's under observation. I show up the next day because she said they're going to release him, and we had just signed the contract, so we didn't even have a caregiver in place yet. And she said, what do I do? And I said, well, we'd have to find a caregiver who could, sustain him. He's a 2-person transfer, which means it takes 2 people to get him to stand up. So it's virtually impossible to bring someone home when they're in that condition. But he didn't qualify for a Medicare all expenses paid trip to rehab.
Because you need to be inpatient for 3 nights.
3 midnights. And he'd only been inpatient 1 midnight, and they were going to keep him another day, so that's 2 midnights. But he was observation anyway. So
do parents or children have any kind of influence over the doctors to get them into the inpatient status?
Really, it's dictated by Medicare. The doctor has, of course, it's his or her word whether they should be inpatient or outpatient. And I think sometimes they do what they can, but the hospital can't get itself into trouble by flipping people to inpatient just because they're the loved one is asking for it.
Okay.
So I helped them. The discharge planner helped them. We called around for respite rates for rehab centers where the room and board would be paid out of pocket by the family, and the therapy would be paid for by Medicare.
Does let's get back to the in-person thing again. I'm just like, what defines observation versus inpatient? Is it observation versus inpatient? Is it the severity of the illness? Like, when my dad had a stroke and he was in the hospital for almost 4 days, but I don't think he was inpatient. I think he was observation. And
it looks the same and it feels the same.
They would schedule a test once a day. I'm like, once a day? They should have done 4 tests a day, and we were there way too long. But he was not inpatient. He was observation, and it was frustrating. Like, how sick do you have to be inpatient? How? Don't know. It's up to the doctor. It's subjective.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Social workers who are more adept at explaining Medicare than I could tell you that. But
we're going to have some of those people on the show.
You have to be pretty sick.
Pretty bad.
to be inpatient.
All right. So we're at the end of our 20 minutes. We're going to say goodbye for now and cut another track soon. Again, thank you for being with us here along the North Shore. I mean, again, please, send us a Facebook message. Send
Right.
us an email.
Want to hear from you.
Because we want to hear from you to see what kind of questions and topics we should cover. What should be a really great name to title these kind of conversations? North Shore Retired, West of Wagner. I don't know. I mean, I want to come up with a really cool name. Again, we're focusing hyper locally in Glenview, Deerfield, Wilmette, Winnetka, Park Ridge, Northbrook. And so to have that conversation with you, our listeners, and people who are helping us drive this conversation, it's really important to us. So I'm Bill Ulivieri, Senecal Capital Management. You can reach me at 847-686-4800. Matt?
Matt Berrafato. MattTheElephantHunter.net is the email address. Actually, I'm Matt the Elephant Hunter. It's Matt@elephanthunting.net. And
Charmaine Conaghan, Always Best Care Senior Services, seniorcarenorthshore.com or 847-730-5930.
Charmaine, thank you for letting us use your office today, and we'll be back